What's up? This is David. Welcome to my vlog, Solid State. We're going to be talking about Genesis, the book of Genesis, in particular Genesis chapter 1, chapter 2 maybe, the creation stories. Why? Why are these stories relevant? Why are these stories applicable in this day and age? How do these stories matter? That we should be looking into what it is that they had to offer, that they do have to offer even today. I think in part we might begin with recognizing that Genesis, the creation story in Genesis has survived the ravages of time. Thousands of years later, here we are, looking into its pages and into its content. And there's something to be said, even at that here we have this book all these years later. And secondarily, it's particularly noteworthy to recognize that the world that Genesis was born in is important in understanding the significance of Genesis chapter 1. It's important in understanding the significance of these texts. Not that we can't understand what it is that they have to say, not that the message is without meaning unless you go back to its origin, but that there's something to be said about looking at the origins of Genesis and appreciating where it came from. The world of antiquity, the world that Genesis was born in, was crafted in, was a world that was single-mindedly polytheistic. Single-mindedly polytheistic. Polytheism is the belief in a multitude of gods. A host of gods. A family tree, as it were. A dysfunctional, raucous, motley crew of deities was the polytheistic worldview of peoples in times past. And what was wrong with that? What fault is held with such notions? Well, let's start by understanding, what were these gods? What were the gods of the ancient world? How did the peoples look at these? How did people look at these gods? What were the gods that they knew? And these gods, as is of historic fact today, these gods were riotous, angry, envious, murderous, jealous. They slept with their sisters. They killed their fathers. Their behavior was wholly disgusting and rotten. And yet these were the gods of the ancient world. They were the worst in men. And what is so wrong with this is that this was their worldview. These were their gods. It is on some level, does it not seem to justify evil? I think that they were explaining evil. They were explaining themselves with their gods. They were projecting upon the supernatural their own most base motivations. And yet, when this is what reality is, when this is the sum of reality, when these gods are projected as most paramount, that which has dominion, that which is greater than men, and when what you see in them is incest and greed and a lust for power, it's no doubt corrupting to the human mind that these would be the source of men's meditation, that these would be the source of men's inner eye, that their inner eye would be focused on such a world view. It is no doubt corrupting. It is no doubt without moral ground. This is the world that Genesis was born in. It was born in a world of mysticism. You know, the gods were mystical. No one knew. You didn't know really the will of the gods, because not one god was like another. They were opposed and at war often with one another. And so reality, as such, was at war with itself. That the heavens were at war with itself. That the world was not approachable. That the world that is offered by polytheism is a mystical, vague, amorphous, opaque, and dark projection of what is worst in men's souls. Polytheism was a divided view of reality. It was not a certain, it was not a sure, nor secure view of reality. It was a divided, raucous, uncertain view of reality. And the mysticism that it promoted was no better than a witch doctor's ramblings, than the madness of witch doctors and their words was the sum of what held up the world in the eyes of the peoples of its time. Genesis comes along. Genesis 1. And it projects, it sets forward a God that is not at war. A God that isn't lusting for power. A God that isn't sourced in ambition. It's a peaceful, serene, deep, moving passage. The verses that constitute the book of the first chapter of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was moving over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light, and God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. There was evening, and there was morning, the first day. This, in the context of when it was written, this was punk rock. This was 1977 punk rock. This was rebellion against the status quo. This was a putting off of all that the world had drawn up in its imagination, in its vain and cruel and gross imagination. This was a putting off of all of that and presenting a world that, this passage goes on, and it says further down, and it says, "Then God said," this is in verse 26, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. And God said, Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed which is upon the face of the earth, and every tree, and these things are your food." I mean, in antiquity, it was only the kings that could be associated with having a relationship with the gods, or the kings were elevated to a certain god status. Certainly in Egypt, the pharaohs. But elsewhere in the ancient world, the rulers of the ancient world, even the Aztecs, the Mayans, and those in the Mesoamericas, they all held their rulers in this deifying status, that they were above. They had the rights. They had the authority. They had the position and the power. And the rest of the people were servants at best, expendable, common. This was the lot of people in the ancient world. And here comes this message that God has made all people. That suddenly there is an equality between all men. For they are made in the image of their Maker. All of them are born up and given a special identity in the world. Rich or poor, slave or free, or king or farmer, are made in the image of God. And this is an amazing pivot. This shatters the view that was wholeheartedly bought and sold to the masses. This shatters it. And it says that nature is not a god, that the river is not a god to be feared, that the wind is not a god to bow down to. That nature is not this unknowable, mystical realm, that you are its subjects, but men may approach nature, and nature can be known, and nature can be made a utility of. For God gave man dominion over the earth. That doesn't mean to pillage and burn and destroy. Dominion over the earth, to work from it utility, to unpackage its potential. The ancient world couldn't offer this. The ancient world couldn't imagine this. The book of Genesis imagines this. The book of Genesis frees men to see the world as it is. Not as a place of dragons and demons and wraiths and unknowable forces of mystery. The book of Genesis makes the world approachable. Genesis, so here is Genesis. This is Genesis. A revolution, a grassroots revolution to separate and to make a way where there was no way, to plow a path, to forge a way where there was no way in the world. And these words are spoken defending the dignity of humankind, defending the dignity that ought to be our place in the world. Genesis sees us not as worms, not as mice. Genesis sees us not as dogs fighting over scraps. Genesis gives us an objective world not to fear. All right, boom, the book of Genesis. Give it a read, check it out. Understand that it's been there for us. It's gone to war for us and it's come back. Genesis is like that old military vet riding the bus, a dude who fought in World War II. Some kids get on the bus and they're disrespectful to him. They sit behind him and they talk loud and they cuss. And they're disrespectful to that old military vet. And they don't realize, man, when he was 19 years old, he flew in behind enemy lines in a bucket of bolts, flying by the seat of his pants with shrapnel trying to blow his ass off. And he jumped out of that plane, man, with his bros, with his comrades, and he fought his way. And he fought his way. And Genesis is like that. Genesis is that book that's been there for us, man. Genesis has been there for us, and it's fought for us. And it started as a grassroots movement. And it pushed aside that corrupt notion, those corrupt ideas that is polytheism. And the kings that used to lord it over us, the rulers and the kings that used to use polytheism and lord it over the people. Genesis turned the tables. All right? Think about that next time you read Genesis chapter 1. All right? All right. Thank you. Subscribe, please. And like. if you like it, and share it if you like it. Check you again next time.